All right, well, today marks the 68th anniversary of the adoption of the Freedom Charter, which formed the basis of the country's constitution. South Africa has been a democracy for 29 years, and heading to the country's upcoming election, have the declarations of the charter been achieved? Let's discuss this now. We are now joined by a member of the 1970s activist, Prof. Saths Cooper. Prof, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News, sir.
My pleasure.
All right, let's talk then about the Freedom Charter. Would you say that, the fact that the Freedom Charter was an essential sort of foundation to our Constitution was a good move in terms of it? Was it a solid foundation to lay the Constitution of our country on?
Well, yes and no. I think that there are many elements that our Constitution has, particularly the preambulatory and significant clauses, which derive from the Freedom Charter. So in many respects, our jurisprudence has been positively affected by what the Freedom claimed.
Yeah. Prof, when you look at the Freedom Charter, some of the rights that are, enshrined within the Freedom Charter, all shall enjoy equal human rights, guarantees the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of conscience, freedom of movement, and the right to privacy. One can say that, in some respects, we have managed indeed to get to those particular points, especially when it comes to speech and freedom of assembly and conscience and so forth. But I'd like to focus specifically on, the enjoyment of equal human rights. And if we're, sitting in a country with such gross inequality, I mean, South Africa being one of the most unequal countries, societies in the world, how can we, with clear conscience, say that, we have really sort of addressed what the Freedom Charter essentially sought to achieve?
Well, this is the rub. And I think that if we were to look at the Freedom Charter, we'll find that perhaps a third of what it proclaimed has been achieved in some form or the other, in the laws, in the protections. However, in the applications of those, particularly socioeconomic rights, which you're referring to, there we fall far short. The Freedom Charter is organized into 10 different sections. And if we were to go through those 10 sections, we'll find that, yes, we can give people, those who crafted the Constitution, a sort of orange rather than a green, to say you've succeeded. But in many respects, we fall far short. The basic issues of security, of jobs, of land, access to land, of a caring, engaged political elite, that clearly is missing and has been missing for at least the last 20 years now. And that is where I think we're falling far short. So if we look at the first section, and that is the people shall govern, it very clearly says every man and woman shall have the right to vote for and to stand as a candidate for all bodies which make laws. But just recently, the president signed into law an amendment to the electoral law, actually punishing individuals who would want to stand for election and privileging parties. It's easier to form a political party than to stand as an individual candidate. So there's a whole lot of punitive measures that have emerged during the last 20 plus years and has entrenched a political class. And this is not restricted to the ANC, by the way. It's nearly all the parties that we find in Parliament who feel comfortable with the current electoral system with a current system that clearly will not meet the needs of the majority of our country's citizens.
Prof.
There
Cooper,
is no intention.
Prof.
For
Cooper,
instance,
surely we can't, as you're alluding to, we can't keep things as are. The status quo is clearly very warped. So, 68 years since the adoption of the Freedom Charter, 29 years since, we became a democracy. You talk about the fact that we are falling short. At this point, we actually shouldn't be falling short any longer. So how do we then address some of these very pertinent issues that you raise, where we do indeed fall short, so that we're not talking another 29 years from now about the fact that we are indeed falling short?
Well, I think we need to have a political class, and that means all paid politicians, essentially, and party bosses, to actually have an open door policy, have their ears, eyes, and minds open to engagement with people, which currently we don't see. We only see it in the deviation when there's a necessity. Otherwise, we don't see it. And perhaps, the last call in the Freedom Charter is these freedoms we will fight for side by side throughout our lives until we have won our liberty. So perhaps some of them, because they were part of the political elite and have been in power, some as early as 1994 and others more recently, lately as November 21, they have given up because they have gotten the political kingdom and they've gotten where they've come from. And all of them now will be scurrying because we will have another general election within the next year. And so we'll be in for a tough period where everybody will be out to outshine everybody else to show that they stand for these glowing principles. On the ground, we need to deal with what you've eloquently pointed out. The starvation, the fact that we have the highest unemployment and the lowest employment rates in the world, and I'm recently informed that South Africa is the richest country on the continent. There should be no reason for these gaps, yet they persist. So what does it tell us about how those in power wish to benefit themselves and not care about the populace that they claim or purport to represent, and indeed run far away from that populace when they knock on the door and are forced to go on a protest, and then all hell breaks loose. That's the sickening pattern of behavior that we have. So we need a change in attitude by the political elite. I don't think we need a change in attitude from the populace. We need a change from the top. At every level from the top, people need to actually begin to start changing and wanting to do things differently and really in a compassionate, inclusive and caring manner.
Prof, it's always a pleasure having you on SABC News. We appreciate your time. That is Professor Saths Cooper, who is the chairperson of the Robben Island Museum Council.